My name is Clara Whitman. I was 19 years old, barely through my first semester at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, when my family decided that Christmas Eve would be the night they finally erased me in public. Milwaukee was covered in a thin sheet of snow that evening, the kind that glows orange under the street lamps, the kind that makes the houses look warmer than they are. My father Gregory had strung tinsel around every doorway the fireplace was lit, and Bing Crosby played faintly in the background. From the outside, it looked like one of those postcard moments, the kind that families cherish forever. On the inside, it was the stage for a humiliation I will never forget. 20 people crowded into the dining room and living room. Relatives from both sides, a few neighbors from church, and my father's colleagues, who never missed the chance to praise him for raising such a successful eldest daughter, Vanessa. My 24-year-old sister had just landed a new marketing position in Chicago and was soaking in every compliment like champagne. Her glass stayed full. Her laughter rose above the holiday music. My stepmother Denise sat beside her, smiling politely, nodding whenever someone praised Vanessa's drive and ambition. Nobody spoke to me except to ask for more roasted vegetables or to pass the bread. I had been in the kitchen since the afternoon, peeling potatoes, glazing carrots, and arranging trays that looked beautiful on the table but carried no trace of my name. When I entered the dining room with the last tray, my arms sore from balancing the weight, the noise dipped just enough for a few eyes to glance at me. Not admiration, not gratitude, just quick glances as if a server had arrived. I placed the tray on the long oak table and stepped back to the corner near the buffet. I had barely sat down with my plate when my father raised his voice over the chatter. His voice was booming, the kind that made people stop mid-bite. Gregory looked around the room as if he were about to make a toast. My heart skipped. For a second, I thought maybe he would say something kind, something simple, like, "Thank you, Clara, for cooking." Instead, he said words that cut through me like ice. "You are 19, Clara. It is time to pay rent or get out." His tone was not casual. It was not playful. It was a decree in front of everyone. Forks froze halfway to mouths. The only sound for a moment was the sharp crackle of the fireplace. I looked around the table. Nobody spoke. Nobody said, "This is not the place." Nobody said she is just a college student. Denise, sitting only 2 chairs away from me, lowered her gaze to her wine glass, took a small sip, and let the silence grow heavier. That silence was louder than his words. Then it happened. Vanessa leaned back in her chair with the confidence of someone who knew the entire room was on her side. She crossed her legs, tilted her head slightly, and with a smirk that was sharper than a knife, she said, "Good luck with that." The words floated above the table like smoke and then broke into laughter. Not all at once. First, a nervous chuckle from a neighbor, then another from a cousin, and then more, until the room filled with the sound of people laughing at me. Some did not even know me well, but they knew it was safe to laugh when Vanessa laughed. My chest tightened. My face burned. I gripped the edge of the tablecloth to keep my hands from shaking. I stared at my father, the man who once wrote silly notes in my lunchbox when I was 10, telling me to smile at recess. I stared at Vanessa, the sister who once begged me to play dolls with her, who used to cry when I refused, who now smiled at my erasure. I searched for a single pair of eyes that looked like they might defend me. There was none. Even Denise, who had promised to treat me like her own years ago, kept her eyes down. She had seen me bullied before and had done nothing. Tonight was no different. She swallowed her wine and let me drown. I could feel humiliation pressing against my chest, but beneath it was something colder, something older, a quiet resolve that told me this was the moment. I was not invisible because I was weak. I was invisible because they wanted me erased and I had been letting them write my story. Not anymore. I looked at my untouched plate. Ham, potatoes, rolls, food. I had cooked food I could not swallow now. I picked it up, walked to the kitchen sink, and placed it gently under the faucet. My hands moved slowly, deliberately, as if every motion was being recorded. The water hissed as it hit the porcelain. I turned it off, dried my hands on a towel, and reached for my coat from the hook behind the door. As I slipped one arm in, Vanessa leaned toward Gregory and whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, "That was overdue." The words were soft, but carried like a final stamp on my existence in that house. I paused just for a heartbeat, looked at her, saw the smirk that confirmed she believed she had won. Then I finished putting on my coat. I opened the door to the living room again. Not one person stood up. Not one person said, "Wait." The laughter returned to normal conversation as if nothing had happened. I walked past the glowing tree, past the stockings hung carefully by Denise, past the warm fire that felt like a mockery, and reached for the front door. My hand trembled not from fear, but from the weight of the decision I was making. I opened the door. Cold air rushed in, sharp and honest. My cheeks burned, but my chest expanded. For the first time all night, I felt something true. The door closed behind me with a soft click. It sounded final. Snow crunched under my boots as I walked down the driveway. My car was parked 3 blocks away because Vanessa's friends had taken every spot near the house. Each step away from that house was both agony and freedom. I thought of the years I had sat by the bathroom door at family dinners, smiling as people brushed past me. I thought of the photographs where I had been cropped out, the birthdays where my name was misspelled, the nights Denise looked away when Vanessa mocked me. All of it had been leading here to this cold street in Milwaukee where I finally chose silence as my answer. Not silence of defeat, but silence of refusal. Refusal to perform the role they had written for me. As I reached the corner, I glanced back at the house one last time. The windows glowed with light. I could still faintly hear laughter, but it was no longer my laughter to join, no longer my burden to carry. I turned back, pulled my coat tighter, and kept walking. This was the night they thought they erased me. Instead, it was the night I decided to write myself back in. The door had closed behind me, sealing in the warmth, the smell of cinnamon, the sound of laughter that no longer belonged to me. Outside, Milwaukee air cut across my face like glass. Snowflakes caught in my hair, melting down into my collar, but the sting of cold felt cleaner than the heat of humiliation. I tightened my coat and walked quickly down the driveway, boots crunching against the ice crust that had formed over the sidewalk. My Ford Focus sat 3 blocks down, half buried under snow, because Vanessa's friends had taken every closer spot. My breath came in visible clouds, sharp and fast, as if my body was racing to purge everything I had swallowed inside that house. Behind me, muffled through the walls, I thought I heard Vanessa laugh again, or maybe it was someone repeating her words for amusement. "Pay rent or get out." The phrase replayed in my head like a cruel refrain, but what came next hit harder. As I reached the first corner of the street, my ears caught another sound, carried faintly through the cold. Denise's voice. Not loud, not defensive. Soft, dismissive. "She'll be fine. She's always dramatic." The words pierced deeper than Vanessa's command. My sister's cruelty was predictable, but Denise's dismissal was confirmation. She had seen me walk out into the freezing night, a 19-year-old with no support, and she had not risen from her chair. She had not stopped me. She had not even pretended to care. She chose to protect her wine glass instead. My eyes burned, but I refused to cry. Tears would freeze on my cheeks, and I did not want to give even the night sky the satisfaction. I pulled my scarf tighter and kept walking. Every step away from the house was heavy but necessary. The neighborhood glittered with inflatable Santas and projectors casting snowflake patterns onto garage doors. Children's voices echoed from a house down the block, squeals of cousins playing with new toys. It all looked like a Norman Rockwell painting, but to me, it felt staged plastic, as false as the smiles inside Gregory's dining room. My keys were cold metal when I finally dug them out of my pocket and reached my car. I scraped snow off the windshield with the edge of my sleeve, breath-ragged fingers stiff. When I opened the door, the seat groaned under my weight, familiar and worn. The car smelled faintly of coffee from the travel mug I had left in the cup holder earlier that day. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine coughed twice, then started with a low rumble. I sat there for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, staring into the rearview mirror. My reflection looked pale, my eyes wide but focused. For once, I did not flinch at my own face. For once, I did not look like a background character in someone else's story. Still, my chest was tight, my thoughts tangled. Was I really leaving for good? Would anyone come after me? My phone was silent in my pocket. No messages, no missed calls. I thought of my mother gone years. Now the only person who would have stopped me at the door, who would have wrapped me in a coat before letting me walk into the snow. Gregory had said nothing. Vanessa had smirked. Denise had turned away. The silence of their inaction was as loud as any scream. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. The tires crunched over fresh snow, leaving a trail behind me. As the house disappeared in the rearview mirror, I felt my hand steady on the wheel. The streets of Milwaukee were quiet, lit only by holiday lights and the occasional passing car. I drove past familiar blocks, the bakery where I had once worked part-time in high school, the church where Christmas pageants had been performed, the small park where Vanessa had hosted summer picnics that I was expected to clean up after. All of it blurred past my windows, now fading into the background as if the city itself was letting me go. At a stoplight, I exhaled deeply, pressing my forehead against the steering wheel for a moment. I let the image of the dining room replay. Gregory's booming voice, Vanessa's smirk, Denise's silence. The guests turning their eyes toward me as if I were a spectacle rather than a daughter. My plate still full of food I had cooked. The laughter swelling after Vanessa's words. Every detail etched itself into my mind. But instead of breaking me, the memory sharpened something inside. It told me this was not a temporary flare of anger. This was not me being dramatic. This was me choosing to leave because staying meant disappearing completely. The light turned green. I lifted my head and kept driving. Snowflakes streaked across the windshield, caught briefly in the glow of street lamps. My phone buzzed once in the passenger seat. My hand froze, then slowly reached for it. A notification lit the screen. Not a call, not a message from anyone at the house. Just a generic calendar alert reminding me about the start of spring semester in Madison. The irony hit me hard. My own schedule, my own future cared more for me than my family did. I dropped the phone back into the seat. As I merged onto the highway toward Madison, the city lights of Milwaukee receded behind me. My stomach knotted, but there was a strange calm beneath the fear. The silence in the car was different from the silence at the table. This silence was mine. I could fill it with music if I wanted to. I could scream into it. I could keep it sacred. I chose to let it remain the low hum of the engine, the only companion. Halfway down the interstate, I imagined the scene inside the house now. Vanessa holding court, explaining away my departure with a laugh. Gregory telling a guest that I had always been irresponsible. Denise offering another refill of wine while whispering that I was too sensitive. None of them would come looking for me. None of them would wonder if I made it to safety. They had erased me so many times in small ways that tonight was simply the final version. But what they did not realize was that erasing me gave me space to rewrite. I stopped at a gas station just outside Waukesha. The fluorescent lights buzzed above as I stepped inside to warm up. The clerk nodded indifferent. I poured coffee into a paper cup and wrapped my hands around it. The heat stung my fingers but brought me back to life. I watched snow swirl under the lamps in the parking lot. For a moment, I thought about turning back, about confronting Gregory in front of everyone, demanding respect, demanding acknowledgement. But then I remembered the silence, the deliberate, suffocating silence. Nothing I could say would matter to people who had decided long ago that my voice did not count. I carried the cup back to the car and sat in the driver's seat again. The coffee steamed against the cold air inside. I took a sip and let the bitterness ground me. No more waiting for their approval. No more asking to be seen. Tonight was not the night I lost my family. Tonight was the night I lost illusions. That was freedom even if it hurt. The road stretched before me dark and endless. Madison waited 2 hours away, and beyond it the small apartment I had secretly rented, the space I would claim as my own. I tightened my grip on the wheel, put the car back in drive, and pulled onto the highway once more. Snow hissed under the tires. The city behind me shrank into memory. Ahead was only what I chose. And in that moment, with the sound of the engine steady and the coffee warm in my hands, I realized something simple and powerful. Silence, when it belongs to you, can be the loudest answer of all. The road stretched ahead of me like a ribbon of ice, but my mind was no longer on the drive. Memories crowded in uninvited, as if leaving the house had unlocked a door inside me. The quiet hum of the engine became a backdrop to scenes I had lived through, moments that at the time I had shrugged off as normal, but now with distance stood out as part of a pattern. a pattern that showed me I had been erased piece by piece long before Vanessa shouted those words across the table. I remembered holidays from when I was 10 or 11. Gregory would carve the ham at the head of the table, Vanessa sitting right beside him, always glowing under the lights. Denise, who had married my father after my mother died, would make sure Vanessa's glass was full, her plate heaped with the best cuts. And me, I was always given the chair nearest the bathroom door. Every holiday, every birthday, every celebration, that seat was mine. It was not spoken aloud, but it was unshakable. The spot nobody wanted, where people brushed past me constantly to wash their hands or freshen up. Guests would mumble apologies as they squeezed by. Sometimes I would miss entire conversations because I was blocked by the noise of the faucet or the door swinging into my shoulder. It was like being half present, half absent. Even as a child, I knew it meant something. You can be here, but not really here. When I was 13, I asked if I could sit near Dad just once. Vanessa rolled her eyes and said, "That's my seat." Gregory chuckled and said, "She's used to it." Denise poured more gravy and told me not to make a fuss. I sat back down in my bathroom chair, cheeks burning, convinced I was wrong for wanting to be seen. Photographs became another weapon of erasure. I used to love cameras when I was little. I would pose with silly faces clutching dolls or school projects, but as the years passed, I noticed my presence shrinking in the family albums. At a Thanksgiving when I was 14, we took a big family picture in the dining room. I had helped set the table, even polished the silverware until my arms ached. When the photo was posted in our shared family album, I was missing, cropped out neatly like I had never been there. I knew because the corner of my sleeve was still visible, a tiny blur of navy sweater. I asked Vanessa about it. She smiled sweetly and said, "It was just a bad angle, Clara." "Don't take it personally," Denise chimed in. "Your sister's right. You always get too sensitive about these little things." It was not little. It was not accidental. By the time I was 16, there were entire events where I existed only in memory. Vanessa's graduation party had dozens of pictures online. Friends, relatives, Gregory looking proud with his arm around Vanessa, and me, nowhere, not even a candid in the background. Denise explained it away. "The photographer just didn't catch you." But I remembered standing right beside Vanessa during one of the group shots. Somehow, when the photo surfaced on Facebook, I was gone. Then there were the names. My name is Clara Simple, not hard to spell. Yet year after year, they managed to get it wrong. The family reunion t-shirts once printed Clara. A Thanksgiving place card read Cara. Last year's Christmas gift tag, written in Vanessa's handwriting, said Madison. Not even close. At first, I thought it was carelessness. Later, I wondered if it was deliberate. A small but constant way of saying, "You are not worth remembering." Each mistake chipped away at my sense of belonging. But the worst memories were not the silent oversights. They were the times when cruelty was clear and Denise, the adult who should have stepped in, chose silence instead. I was 15 the day Vanessa slapped me in the kitchen. We had been arguing over who would wash the dishes. I insisted we could take turns. Vanessa, already taller and stronger, shoved me against the counter and struck me across the cheek. The plate I was holding shattered on the floor. I froze, eyes stinging, heart racing. Denise stood in the doorway. She had seen the whole thing. She set down her glass, looked at me and said evenly, "Don't provoke your sister." Then she turned back into the dining room. I stood in the kitchen surrounded by shards, realizing I had just been marked as the problem even when I was the one bleeding. That was not the only time. At 17, when Vanessa mocked my acceptance letter to Madison in front of dinner guests, calling it the cheap option compared to her Chicago dream, I waited for Denise to correct her. Instead, Denise laughed lightly, almost nervously, and changed the subject to holiday decorations. The message was clear. Vanessa's cruelty was inconvenient, but my hurt was invisible. Gregory was no better. He prided himself on order and control, and he directed it at me constantly. "Clara, clear the table. Clara, shovel the driveway. Clara, why do you waste time with that sketchbook? It will never pay bills." His voice was a steady drumbeat of dismissal. My achievements, no matter how small, were met with indifference. When I made honor roll in high school, he shrugged and said, "That's expected." When Vanessa won a regional debate contest, he hosted a dinner in her honor. Denise baked a cake. I washed the dishes alone. Looking back now, driving away from that house, I realized none of it had been random. The bathroom chair, the cropped photos, the misspelled names, the ignored accomplishments, the violence excused with a shrug. It had been a deliberate culture of erasure, a way of telling me year after year that my existence was conditional, peripheral, expendable. The cruelty was not always loud. Sometimes it was silence at the right moment, the refusal to intervene, the studied look away. Silence when I cried. Silence when I was hit. Silence when I asked for fairness. That silence was its own form of violence, a denial of my reality. Denise's silence in particular carved deep scars. She could have been a shield. She could have been the adult who said, "Stop." Instead, she poured wine, smiled, and let Vanessa learn that she could humiliate me without consequence. My chest ached as I gripped the steering wheel tighter, the car steady on the snowy road. I replayed the moment from earlier tonight when Gregory had boomed his decree, when Vanessa had scoffed, when Denise had kept her eyes on her glass. It was not new. It was the culmination of everything they had rehearsed for years, a performance they had perfected until it no longer shocked the audience. I had been erased long before Christmas Eve. Tonight was simply the first time they signed the erasure in front of witnesses. And yet, as bitter as those memories were, I felt a shift inside me. They thought these small acts had broken me, reduced me to nothing. But pieced together, they now told a different story. They showed me a pattern I could finally name. They showed me the evidence that I had never been safe in that house, that my invisibility was constructed, not natural. And if it was constructed, it could be dismantled. The highway curved a dark ribbon lined with bare trees. Snow clung to the branches like ash. My headlights illuminated the road ahead, and in that narrow cone of light, I found clarity. The past was heavy, but it was also fuel. Every time Vanessa pushed me aside, every time Gregory dismissed me, every time Denise stayed silent, they had unknowingly built my resolve. They had taught me to survive being unseen. Tonight, for the first time, I saw it clearly. Their silence was not my truth. Their erasure was not my end. I thought back to one more memory, the one that sealed everything. It was 2 summers ago at Vanessa's engagement party in Door County. She had rented a rustic barn decorated with fairy lights, a string quartet playing in the corner. Guests toasted her future, praising her brilliance. At one point, the lights dimmed and a slideshow began. Childhood photos, family trips, high school dances. On the screen appeared a picture from the lake, all of us smiling on the dock. Except not all of us. I was cropped out again. My arm lingered on the edge of the frame, but my face was gone. The guests applauded. No one noticed. Not Gregory. Not Denise. Not even me at the time. I told myself it was just an oversight. Now I knew better. It was practice. It was foreshadowing. My hands tightened on the wheel, my jaw set. For years they had tried to convince me that invisibility was my fate. But invisibility can be a powerful cloak. If they could not see me, they could not predict me. And that meant I could act freely outside their script. Tonight was the first step. As the odometer ticked forward, I let the memories settle, not as chains, but as proof. Proof that I was right to walk out. Proof that the erasure was real. Proof that Denise's silence was as sharp as Vanessa's words. Proof that Gregory's control was theft of my voice. Proof that leaving was not rebellion, but survival. The highway signs pointed toward Madison. 2 more hours until I would stand in a place that belonged only to me. For the first time in years, I felt the stirrings of power in my chest. The girl they had cropped out of pictures, shoved into bathroom chairs, and renamed on gift tags was behind the wheel now. And she was not driving back. By the time the exit signs for Madison appeared, the horizon had shifted from dark sky to the faintest hint of pale blue. Dawn was breaking a quiet witness to my escape. The city spread out before me, familiar from countless commutes to classes, yet strangely new in the light of what I had just left behind. I followed the empty streets toward the small apartment complex I had signed a lease for in secret, tucked just off East Johnson Street, close enough to campus to walk but far enough to feel separate. The parking lot was nearly deserted. Snow crunched under the tires as I eased into a space shut off the engine and sat in silence for a moment. The building was not impressive, just a squat brick structure from the 1970s, its balconies lined with metal railings. But to me, it glowed like a sanctuary. No one here would call me dramatic. No one here would measure me against Vanessa. No one here would watch silently while I was humiliated. I stepped out into the cold and pulled my coat tighter. The air in Madison was sharper than Milwaukee's, less heavy with the weight of family history. My boots left fresh prints leading to the side entrance. Inside the hallway smelled faintly of paint and new carpeting. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I unlocked the door to my unit and pushed it open, heart thudding. The apartment greeted me with emptiness. White walls, beige carpet, bare windows. A few unopened boxes lined the living room wall. Things I had brought gradually over the past weeks when I found excuses to stay late on campus. My small coffee maker sat on the counter, plugged in ready for me. The refrigerator hummed softly, half filled with basics I had bought on the sly. It was not much, but it was mine. I set my bag on the couch and peeled off my coat. The silence wrapped around me like a blanket. No laughter that cut me down. No eyes rolling when I spoke. Just quiet. My knees nearly buckled with the relief of it. I crossed to the window and looked out. Snowflakes drifted lazily past the glass, settling on the street below where a lone jogger braved the cold. For once, I was not watching from the edges of someone else's celebration. I was standing in the center of my own space. Still, the emptiness pressed on me. There were no family photos on the walls, no holiday decorations, no voices in the next room. The silence was different from the one at home. It was chosen, not imposed, but it was heavy nonetheless. I filled the kettle and set it on the stove, watching the steam curl upward. When the whistle blew, I poured hot water over coffee grounds, inhaling the rich, bitter scent. The cup warmed my hands as I settled on the couch. The weight of the night before hit me fully then. The dining room replayed in my mind. Gregory's voice booming. Vanessa's smirk slicing Denise's silence like a blade. My chest tightened. My body trembled not from cold, but from the memory of standing alone in a room full of people who had decided my worth was nothing. I closed my eyes and breathed in the coffee's steam until my heartbeat steadied. On the small table beside the couch sat a candle I had grabbed from the Christmas party before leaving. A clearance bin candle price tag still stuck to the side. It was meant to be a gesture, but it felt like mockery. A reminder that I was worth less than $3 to them. I stared at it, then slid it to the edge of the table. Not today. Not here. This space would not carry their cheap symbols. Instead, I looked around at the bare walls and felt a stirring of possibility. I imagined shelves lined with my books not shoved into boxes in the basement. I imagined a small desk where I could write without someone telling me it was a waste of time. I imagined pictures that included me unedited, unerased. It would take time, but this place would become a reflection of who I was, not who they told me to be. As the coffee cooled, I wandered through the apartment. The bedroom was small, the mattress still wrapped in plastic from delivery. I tore the plastic away, slowly, methodically, as if unwrapping proof of my independence. The bathroom smelled faintly of new tile grout, sterile but promising. I opened the closet and ran my hand along the empty rail. Space. Space to hang clothes without hearing Vanessa complain that I was taking up room. Space to exist without shrinking. When exhaustion finally pulled at me, I curled up on the bare mattress with a blanket from one of the boxes. The hum of the radiator lulled me. My body ached, not from labor, but from release, as if I had shed a skin that was too tight for too long. I did not cry. The tears had dried somewhere between Milwaukee and Madison. Instead, I let the quiet cradle me until sleep came. Hours later, I woke to sunlight streaming through the blinds. The world outside glowed white and fresh. I brewed another cup of coffee and stood at the window watching students hurry along the sidewalks bundled in coats and scarves. Life was moving on, indifferent to my family's cruelty, indifferent to Vanessa's smirk. That indifference was a comfort. It meant I could move on too. I thought about calling someone an old friend, maybe a professor who had encouraged me, but stopped. This first day in my apartment was not about seeking validation. It was about proving to myself that I could survive without begging for scraps of acknowledgement. I had chosen to leave, and now I had to choose to build. I walked to the kitchen, opened a box, and began stacking dishes into cabinets. The sound of ceramic against wood echoed through the empty space, small but grounding. Each plate, each mug, each spoon found its place. Piece by piece, I was filling the apartment with signs of life. My life. Not borrowed, not dismissed, not cropped out. That night, as darkness fell again, I sat at the window with a notebook. The page stared back blank and expectant. I wrote one line at the top. "This is mine." The words looked small, but they anchored me. For the first time in years, I believed them. The second night in my apartment was colder than the first. The radiator rattled like it was trying to keep up but never quite could, and the wind pressed against the windows with a low whistle. I pulled my blanket tighter around me as I sat on the couch with my laptop. At first, I only wanted to distract myself with simple tasks: updating my address for school, paying a utility bill, checking my email. But one click led to another, and suddenly I was staring at numbers that told a story I had never wanted to believe. For years, Gregory had insisted I pay him what he called house contributions. He framed it as responsibility, as learning to pull my weight. Since I turned 17 every month, I had transferred money into his account under the memo line "Rent Home." He said it covered part of the mortgage and utilities, that it was only fair if I wanted to stay. I believed him even when it meant working late shifts at the bookstore near campus. I believed him when my classmates went to concerts while I pinched pennies to send him $300. I believed because he was my father, and I thought fathers told the truth. Now, with my laptop glowing in the dim apartment, I saw a long line of transactions stretching back 2 years. Rent home, rent home, rent home. Page after page of digital proof that I had been funneling my wages into his account. My stomach twisted. Something about it nagged at me, so I dug deeper. I searched for the mortgage company's website and pulled up the property information for the Milwaukee house. The balance didn't match what I had been told. My father always claimed he was barely keeping up, that my contributions helped keep the roof over my head. But the records showed a different story. Payments had been missed. The account was delinquent for 3 months. 3 months. Which meant that while I was scraping together money while I was going without new shoes or skipping meals to cover my share, Gregory wasn't paying the mortgage at all. I grabbed my phone and dialed the customer service number listed on the site. The hold music was a tinny piano melody that repeated every 30 seconds. I sat there staring at the clearance candle on the table, the cheap price tag glaring up at me like a joke. My knee bounced furiously. Finally, a voice answered. I explained I had recently moved out and wanted to confirm contact details for the account at that address. The representative hesitated, typing. "Ma'am, you're not listed as an account holder." My throat tightened. Of course I wasn't. Gregory had never added me, but the rep's tone shifted. "I should let you know that account has been delinquent for 90 days. The words dropped heavy into the silence of my apartment. 90 days. 3 months of no payments. Meanwhile, I had been sending him money labeled as rent. Where had it gone? Not to the bank. Not to the roof he claimed I was helping protect. My mind flashed back to Vanessa's designer handbags, the catered spreads at holidays, the patio furniture Denise boasted about. My money, the hours of my life spent working, erased into their comforts. I thanked the rep and ended the call. My voice steady, though my hands trembled. I closed my laptop, then opened it again immediately. I needed more proof. I scrolled through each bank transfer, downloading PDFs one by one, saving them into a new folder I named Receipts. Each file was a month of my life stolen. Each line was a reminder that my father had weaponized the idea of debt, not just financial, but emotional. He made me believe I owed him for existing under his roof, when in truth I had been keeping that roof from collapsing. I sat back, staring at the screen. The humiliation of Christmas Eve shifted into something sharper. Anger, yes, but also clarity. This wasn't just about words at a dinner table. This was theft. This was manipulation so deep it had convinced me to thank them for taking from me. As I organized the files, a new notification flashed at the top of my screen. Urgent credit alert. My pulse spiked. I clicked. The email detailed a new department store card opened in my name. My old address in Milwaukee was listed as the billing location. I scrolled further. The most recent charge, nearly $300 at a high-end beauty retailer. My chest burned. I had never bought anything there. My wardrobe was thrift stores and clearance racks. My paycheck barely covered books and gas, but someone had used my social security number to open credit lines, and they weren't even subtle about it. I logged into the credit reporting site I had almost forgotten existed. My hands shook as I entered my information. The results populated, and there it was. Not one, but two credit cards opened fraudulently. One at a department store, another at a home goods chain. My old address matched both accounts. The purchase history made my jaw clench. Designer heels, an $800 hairdryer, a Vitamix blender. Things I had seen on Vanessa's Instagram stories flaunted without shame. And now I knew how she paid for them. With my name. With my credit. I felt the air leave my lungs. I stood up, pacing the room, gripping my arms to steady myself. This wasn't forgetfulness. This wasn't oversight. This was criminal. My sister had stolen not just my dignity, but my identity, and Gregory had let it happen under his roof. Denise had smiled while it happened, poured more wine, and called me dramatic. I forced myself back to the couch, opened a new document, and began listing everything. Dates, amounts, account numbers, screenshots saved to a folder labeled deliberate. I needed it all in black and white because I knew how this family worked. They didn't apologize. They didn't admit wrongdoing. They told stories. They twisted truths until you doubted your own memory. Not this time. This time, I would have evidence they couldn't erase. When the adrenaline finally eased, exhaustion crept in. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling of my bare apartment. The hum of the radiator filled the silence. I thought about the years I had spent cooking dinners, washing dishes, paying bills that weren't mine. I thought about Vanessa laughing as she unwrapped gifts I couldn't afford, gifts I had indirectly paid for with my stolen wages. I thought about Gregory's booming voice declaring I owed him rent. The irony was almost unbearable. I had already been paying rent. I had been paying more than my share. And still he had stood in front of 20 people and called me a freeloader. I pressed my palms into my eyes until spots danced across my vision. The weight of it all threatened to crush me. But then, like a spark in the dark, I remembered the folder on my desktop. Receipts. Deliberate. Words that meant I was no longer the invisible girl at the bathroom chair. I was a witness now, a witness to my own story. The next morning, I printed the first stack of statements at the library on campus. The warm paper slid into my hands heavier than it should have been. I clipped them together and tucked them into a plain folder. Holding it, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control. I could almost hear Vanessa's voice mocking me, Gregory's voice booming Denise's sigh of dismissal. But the folder in my hands was louder. It said, "Here is the truth. Here is proof you cannot laugh away." I walked back to my apartment folder pressed against my chest. Snowflakes clung to my hair. The city bustled around me, strangers with grocery bags, students with headphones, joggers braving the cold. None of them knew what I carried, but I knew. And for once, that was enough. That night, I placed the folder on my desk right beside the clearance candle. I lit the candle, watched the flame flicker against the cheap glass. I let it burn while I stared at the stack of evidence. The candle was their gift, their careless insult. The folder was mine, my weapon forged from years of erasure. One cost $2.99. The other cost me years of my life. Both burned, but only one would last. The folder sat on my desk like a living thing. Every time I glanced at it, I felt a mix of dread and strength, as if I were staring at both my wounds and my armor. The statements, the screenshots, the alerts, they were more than paper and ink. They were the story of my erasure, written not in memories that could be dismissed, but in numbers and facts that could not be laughed away. And I knew I wasn't finished. Not yet. I woke the next morning with a strange clarity. The sunlight spilled through the blinds in silver streaks, cold and sharp. For once, I didn't feel the weight of the family silence pressing down on me. Instead, I felt a task list forming in my mind, each item like a step toward reclaiming something they had stolen. I brewed coffee and sat at my desk opening my laptop again. The hum of the radiator and the soft clink of the spoon against my mug were the only sounds, but it felt like a rallying drumbeat. I started with the bank. Every monthly transfer I had made into Gregory's account I downloaded into separate PDFs. One by one, I renamed them carefully: Rent, Jan 2019, Rent, Feb 2019, and so on. I watched the folder grow line after line of evidence stretching across years. The progress bar crawling across my screen felt like a clock ticking down to justice. When I finished, I printed the stack at the library again, feeding them into the copier until the machine hummed with heat. The papers slid out warm, smelling faintly of ink. I clipped them together and labeled them bank transfers. Next came the credit reports. I logged into the monitoring site, screenshotting each fraudulent account. The balances, the charges, the addresses. Vanessa's fingerprints all over my name. I saved them into a second folder called Identity Theft. When I printed those, I took a highlighter and traced over each charge that screamed her lifestyle. Designer shoes, beauty salons, a Vitamix blender that she had bragged about on Instagram with a caption, "Invest in yourself." I nearly laughed at the irony. The investment had been mine. The theft had been hers. I spread the papers across my desk, the cheap candle flickering beside them. For a moment, I felt dizzy. Each page was proof, but together they looked overwhelming, like a tidal wave I had lived under without realizing. I pressed my palms to the table to steady myself. No more dizziness, no more letting the weight crush me. This was not chaos, it was order. Order I was creating. I bought a binder that afternoon, a plain black one from the campus store. I slipped the papers into plastic sleeves, each one labeled. Tab dividers separated the sections. Bank transfers, credit cards, mortgage records, screenshots. I even included copies of family photos where I had been cropped out labeled erasure patterns. Not legally damning, but emotionally undeniable. Every page told a piece of the story, and together they formed a narrative no one could erase. As I worked, I remembered Gregory's voice calling me dramatic, Vanessa's smirk, Denise's silence. I realized that this binder was the opposite of drama. Drama is fleeting, designed to shock and vanish. Evidence is steady. Evidence speaks long after the laughter fades. I sat back in my chair and looked at the binder, thick and heavy now. I imagined sliding it across a lawyer's desk. I imagined Vanessa's face when confronted with printouts of her charges. I imagined Gregory fumbling when asked about the mortgage he had claimed I was helping cover. And Denise, silent, Denise. What would she say when shown years of deliberate neglect? Probably nothing, but silence would not protect her anymore. That evening, I lit the clearance candle again, watching the flame tremble. I held one of the statements close to it, not to burn, but to feel the heat. A thought ran through me like lightning. This is how you fight erasure. You turn silence into ink. You turn humiliation into folders. You turn gaslighting into receipts. Still, I knew paper alone wasn't enough. Families like mine thrived on twisting stories. I needed backup, digital, physical, redundant. I scanned every page into PDFs, uploaded them to a cloud drive, and saved a copy onto a USB stick. I slid the USB into a small envelope and taped it to the underside of my desk drawer. If anything happened, the truth would survive. The work took hours, but I didn't feel drained. I felt alive, as if each page I organized returned a piece of me that had been taken. By midnight, the binder was full, the folders synced, the USB hidden. My apartment smelled faintly of burnt wax and coffee. I closed the binder and placed it on the shelf. For the first time, the silence around me didn't feel empty. It felt like readiness. I poured another cup of coffee and stood by the window. Outside, Madison slept under a blanket of snow. Street lamps glowed orange and a plow rumbled in the distance. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, tired but steady. I whispered to it, "They can't laugh this away." And then I thought of Denise. The memory of her voice at Christmas Eve rang clear. She'll be fine. She's always dramatic. How many times had she chosen to side with silence to let Vanessa's cruelty stand unchallenged? How many times had she poured another drink instead of saying, "Stop"? She was not the one shouting like Gregory. She was not the one smirking like Vanessa. but her silence was its own act of violence. I wrote a tab just for her. Complicity. Under it, I slid notes of incidents I remembered: the slap in the kitchen, the laughter brushed aside the birthday where she looked away as Vanessa humiliated me. No paper trail, but testimony. My testimony. When I finally turned off the light and lay down, I felt the binder's weight, even from across the room. Heavy, solid, real. For years, I had been told I was too sensitive, too emotional, too fragile. But sensitive doesn't print receipts. Emotional doesn't organize evidence. Fragile doesn't build binders that could break a narrative wide open. The flame of the clearance candle sputtered out, leaving only smoke curling in the dark. I smiled faintly. That cheap little insult had become my witness, sitting beside the binder like a reminder of where I began and how far I would go. Tomorrow, I thought as sleep crept in. Tomorrow, I take this further. Tonight, I built the evidence. Tomorrow, I begin to use it. The next morning broke gray, and still the kind of Wisconsin winter day where the sun seemed unwilling to rise at all. My apartment felt smaller than usual, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The binder sat on the shelf, thick with evidence, a quiet sentinel guarding everything I had uncovered. I made coffee, wrapped my hands around the mug, and tried to steady my thoughts. Today would be just another day of class errands, the routine of survival. That was what I told myself. But fate had other plans. The knock came mid-morning. 3 short raps against the door. Not tentative, not aggressive, just firm. My stomach tightened. Hardly anyone knew I lived here. I moved quietly, peeking through the peephole. What I saw made me inhale sharply. Aunt Deborah. I had not spoken to her since my mother's funeral years ago. She was my mother's older sister, the one with the steel gray hair always tied back the wool coats that smelled faintly of cedar. She had never been close to Gregory, and after Mom's death, she drifted to the edges of our family gatherings. Sometimes she sent birthday cards with neat handwriting. Sometimes she stayed away completely. But here she was standing in the hallway of my new apartment building, her scarf wrapped tightly against the cold, her eyes lined with fatigue. I opened the door slowly. Aunt Deborah. My voice cracked. She gave a small nod, her lips pressed into a line. She didn't ask to come in, didn't offer a hug. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small white envelope. Inside was a USB stick. She held it out to me. "Your mother would be proud," she said simply. "You're not wrong." Her voice trembled slightly, but her gaze was steady. I froze, staring at the envelope in her hand. "What is this?" I whispered. "You'll see," she replied, already turning to leave. She didn't linger. No explanations, no reassurances, no perfumed speeches about family unity. Just truth dropped into my palm like a stone. She walked down the hall with measured steps, her coat brushing the walls, and disappeared around the corner. I closed the door, my heart hammering. The apartment was suddenly too quiet. I set the coffee mug down and sat at my desk, the binder watching from its place on the shelf. My hands shook as I tore open the envelope and slid out the USB stick. I pushed it into my laptop, holding my breath as the screen blinked. A single video file appeared. I clicked play. The footage was shaky, filmed on a phone. I recognized the setting instantly: Vanessa's engagement party in Door County. Fairy lights strung across the barn beams, laughter echoing, glasses clinking. In the video, Vanessa sat at a table surrounded by friends and relatives. Gregory was beside her, raising his glass in a toast. Denise hovered nearby, smiling, her hand resting lightly on Vanessa's shoulder. Someone off-screen asked, "Are you going to make Clara one of your bridesmaids?" Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Clara," she scoffed, her smile spreading as the crowd leaned closer. "She's not really part of that. She's more like the emergency fund. You know, the backup bank account. We keep her close just in case." Laughter erupted around the table. Gregory clinked his glass against hers, grinning. "She doesn't mind," he said. "She's always been helpful." The camera caught Denise at that moment, nodding with a small chuckle, sipping her wine as if it were the most natural conversation in the world. The laughter filled my apartment. My chest tightened until I could hardly breathe. It wasn't a joke that slipped out in private. It was their worldview spoken aloud, clear and proud, without fear of correction. They hadn't just stolen from me, they had mocked me for it, made my erasure part of their entertainment. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen long after the clip ended. My hands trembled, but my mind was sharp. This was more than bank statements and credit reports. This was their voices, their faces, undeniable proof of how little I meant to them. Aunt Deborah had kept this video. She had carried it until now, waiting for the moment I would be ready to see it. For the first time in years, I felt something break through the fog of humiliation. Validation. I was not crazy. I was not dramatic. I had been erased deliberately, and now I had their confession recorded. I reopened my binder, flipping to a new tab I labeled Direct Evidence. I printed still frames from the video, Gregory smiling, Vanessa smirking, Denise nodding. Underneath, I typed a transcript of their words, every syllable sharp on the page. I slid it into the plastic sleeve, my hands steadier with each motion. The binder grew heavier, not just with paper, but with truth. When I closed it again, I pressed my palm against the cover and whispered, "You can't erase this." I thought of Aunt Deborah walking away without explanation. She hadn't needed to explain. Her presence at my door was explanation enough. She had seen what they did to me maybe for years, and though she hadn't spoken up before, she had kept proof. She had chosen this moment to place it in my hands. It wasn't an apology, but it was recognition. For once, someone had seen me not as dramatic or disposable, but as real. I spent the rest of the day copying the video onto my USB, my cloud drive, even emailing it to myself under a coded subject line. Redundancy became ritual. This piece was too important to risk losing. If the binder was my shield, the video was my sword. That night, I walked to the lakefront in Madison, the cold biting at my face. The water was frozen near the shore, the moonlight reflecting off jagged sheets of ice. I thought about Vanessa's smirk, Gregory's laugh, Denise's silence. I thought about Aunt Deborah's weary eyes as she handed me the envelope. And I thought about my mother gone too soon, who would have never allowed this. The grief rose in my chest, but it was different now. It was grief sharpened into resolve. I whispered into the night air, "I will not disappear." My voice carried small but certain across the ice. When I returned to my apartment, I set the binder and the USB side by side on the desk. For years, I had been the forgotten daughter, the cropped-out face, the bathroom chair occupant. Now I had proof. Proof they couldn't laugh away. Proof that would soon leave the privacy of my apartment and step into the public light. The unexpected ally had given me the final piece of armor, and with it I was ready to confront the people who had built their comfort on my silence. The binder felt heavier than it was. I carried it in a plain black tote bag, but my shoulder ached with every step. Inside was everything: the bank transfers, the fraudulent charges, the mortgage records, the photographs where I'd been cropped out, and now the video Aunt Deborah had given me. It wasn't just paper. It was my voice, my proof, my shield. And I was taking it back into the very house where they thought they'd silenced me forever. Milwaukee looked different that day. The streets were gray, salted from last night's snow, the air biting against my cheeks. I drove past neighborhoods I knew too well, corners tied to childhood memories that now felt poisoned. Each block brought me closer to the house I had fled on Christmas Eve, the house where Gregory had boomed his decree, where Vanessa had smirked, where Denise had lowered her eyes. For a moment, I almost turned the car around. Confrontation wasn't my nature. I had always swallowed the hurt, always chosen silence. But silence had become their weapon. Today, I would speak in the language they couldn't ignore: receipts. I parked down the street, clutching the tote bag close. My boots crunched on the icy sidewalk as I walked toward the house. The Christmas wreath still hung on the door, though its red ribbon had begun to sag. Through the window, I saw the glow of the fireplace. For a second, it was like stepping back into the night I left. Only this time, I wasn't carrying a tray of vegetables. I was carrying truth. I knocked once firmly. After a pause, the door opened. Gregory stood there, his expression tightening when he saw me. He didn't move aside. "Clara," he said, his voice measured. "What are you—" "I'm here to talk," I interrupted. "All of you. Together." He hesitated, then stepped back. "Fine. Come in." The living room looked the same. The fire crackled, casting shadows on the walls. Vanessa lounged on the couch with her phone in hand, her nails painted a glossy crimson. Denise sat in the armchair, a glass of wine on the side table. When they saw me, Vanessa raised her brows, smirking, as if she'd already won whatever game she thought I was playing. Denise shifted uncomfortably but didn't speak. I set the tote bag down on the coffee table and pulled out 3 envelopes, one for each of them. I slid them across the polished wood. "These are copies," I said. "The originals stay with me." Vanessa snorted. "What is this homework? Open it," I replied. Gregory tore his envelope open first, scanning the pages. Bank transfers. Every dollar I had sent him labeled "Rent Home." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Vanessa flipped through hers and froze when she saw the screenshots. Designer Heels hairdryers, the Vitamix blender. Her name tied to accounts opened under mine. Her smirk faltered for the first time. Denise lifted hers hesitantly. Inside were photographs from the engagement party video, still frames of her smiling, while Gregory and Vanessa laughed about me being an emergency fund. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the papers back on the table. "This is ridiculous!" Gregory finally said, his voice louder now, trying to reclaim the room. "You're making a scene." I leaned forward, my voice calm but steady. "No. You made the scene when you stood in front of 20 people and told me to pay rent or get out. You made the scene when you let Vanessa steal from me. You made the scene when Denise stayed silent." Vanessa slammed her envelope shut. "You're just bitter because no one catered to your endless drama. Always playing the victim, Clara." My throat burned, but I didn't flinch. Victims don't collect receipts. Victims don't print credit reports. Victims don't have video evidence of their family laughing about using them as a bank account. This isn't drama. This is fraud. This is theft. Denise rose slowly, stepping toward me with arms half raised, her face arranged in a mask of sympathy. "Clara, sweetheart, I know you've been hurt," but I stepped back. My voice cracked like ice. "No more hugs from people who let this happen." Her arms froze midair, then fell to her sides. For once, she had no words. The silence that followed was thick. The fire popped, the only sound in the room. I reached into the tote bag again and pulled out the USB stick. I held it up between my fingers. "I have the video. Aunt Deborah gave it to me. You laughed about me being your emergency fund. Gregory, you raised your glass. Vanessa, you said it. Denise, you nodded. It's all there." Vanessa's face went pale. "That," she stammered, but no excuse came. I set the USB down on the table. "You don't get to erase me anymore. If I receive one more charge in my name, if I hear one more lie spread about me, this goes public. Police, court, media, your choice." Gregory's face hardened, but his hands gripped the arms of his chair too tightly. Vanessa's lips pressed into a thin line. Denise sank back into her seat, her wine untouched. None of them laughed this time. None of them called me dramatic. I stood the tote bag still half full with more evidence. I didn't need to stay. I had said what I came to say. As I walked to the door, I felt Vanessa's eyes burning into my back, but she didn't speak. Gregory's voice rumbled low, like he was trying to hold on to authority, but he didn't stop me. Denise looked down at her lap, her silence heavier than ever. The doorknob was cold in my hand. I opened the door, the winter air rushing in sharp and honest. I stepped outside without looking back. The door clicked shut behind me. The walk down the driveway felt different this time. Not the shaky escape of Christmas Eve, but a march of release. I glanced at the garden beds I used to weed the porch. I had painted the window where my mother once stood with coffee in hand. Each detail was familiar, but none of it belonged to me anymore. Snow crunched under my boots as I reached the street. Neighbors were out shoveling driveways, their eyes curious as they glanced at me leaving the house with a binder pressed against my chest. Let them wonder. Soon enough, the whispers would spread. I climbed into my car, shut the door, and sat in silence. My breath fogged the glass. My hands shook slightly on the steering wheel, not from fear, but from release. I had faced them. I had said the words they never expected to hear from me. I wasn't erased anymore. As I drove away, I knew the confrontation was only the beginning. The real consequences were still to come, and this time, the silence that followed wasn't theirs to define. It was mine. The binder sat on the passenger seat as I drove away from Milwaukee, the weight of it reassuring against the rattle of the old Ford Focus. I had left their house behind, but I knew the confrontation wasn't the end. It was a spark. And sparks don't just vanish, they catch fire. By the time I reached Madison, the fire was already spreading. The first call came 2 days later from a number I didn't recognize. It was a collections department asking about the fraudulent charges tied to my name. I explained clearly, carefully, and provided the documents I had already compiled. The woman on the other end paused, then said in a low voice, "You're not the first person to report misuse connected to that address." Her words lodged in my chest like a stone. Not the first. Which meant Vanessa's carelessness had already started to unravel. That same evening, Gregory's name appeared on my phone screen. I let it ring until it faded. A voicemail came through minutes later. "Clara, we need to talk before this gets worse." I played it once, then saved it directly into my Gaslight archive folder. Worse was already happening. By the weekend, the fallout was visible. Gregory's neighbors, people who had watched him boast about Vanessa's promotion and Denise's dinner parties, were whispering in hushed tones over snowblowers and shovels. I didn't have to be there to hear it. My cousin texted me, "Everyone at church is talking. They're saying Uncle Greg's in trouble with the bank." "Did you do something?" I stared at the message, then typed back. I told the truth. The truth had legs. On Monday, I received an email from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. A small local reporter had picked up on a tip about a potential case of identity theft tied to a prominent family in the community. They wanted to know if I'd be willing to comment. I didn't respond immediately, but the knowledge that someone outside the family bubble was looking in made me exhale in relief. The silence that had protected Gregory and Vanessa was cracking. I scrolled through Facebook later that day. Gregory's account was quiet, almost eerie for a man who loved to post pictures of Christmas trees and golf outings. Denise had posted a vague message, "Family is complicated. Sometimes love looks different than we expect." The comments were half supportive, half suspicious. But the real storm was on Vanessa's page. Her glamorous posts had slowed. Beneath a photo of her smiling in a red coat downtown Chicago, comments had begun piling up. "Is it true you used your sister's credit? Wow, stealing from family. Disgusting if that's real." She had deleted some, but more kept appearing. Her silence was louder than any denial. At Gregory's church, where reputation was currency, the whispers turned sharp. A friend of mine from high school who still attended sent me a screenshot of a group message. "Did you hear Clara exposed them? Rent fraud credit cards in her name, and now the bank might foreclose. Imagine the shame." The shame. For once, the shame wasn't mine. Denise, I learned, became the focus of her women's club. My Aunt Deborah called one evening, her voice low, but tinged with a satisfaction she didn't try to hide. "They're all asking how much she knew she told me. She just sits there sipping her wine saying nothing." But people notice. They always notice when someone says nothing. The fallout wasn't just whispers. Real consequences landed. Gregory received a formal notice from the bank. The mortgage delinquency was now under investigation. He had to appear at a meeting to explain the missing payments. My cousin told me he looked smaller than usual. Shoulders hunched, voice quiet. That booming laugh he had saved for Vanessa was gone. And Vanessa, her company in Chicago, prided itself on image. Word traveled fast. A colleague who followed me on Instagram sent a private message. "She's suspended. HR is investigating the credit fraud stuff. Nobody wants the press sniffing around." For someone who lived off status, off being the golden child, the suspension was a public stripping of her crown. The community where they once stood tall was now watching them stumble. At the grocery store, neighbors whispered when Gregory walked past. At church, the pastor prayed vaguely for families facing trials, but everyone knew the prayer was for them. Denise's club, once her social refuge, became a cage of judgment. People leaned in pretending sympathy, but their eyes sparkled with curiosity. "Did you really not know, Denise?" they asked. Her silence was finally a curse, not a shield. I sat in my Madison apartment binder on my desk watching the ripples spread. I hadn't shouted, I hadn't slammed doors, I hadn't thrown punches. I had simply placed truth into the world, and the world had done the rest. The very community that had once ignored my invisibility now couldn't stop talking about me, not as a burden, not as dramatic, but as the one who pulled back the curtain. Yet the fallout was not all schadenfreude. It came with messages I didn't expect. My old teacher, Mrs. Larson, sent an email I saw the story. "I want you to know, Clara, I always noticed you. I'm sorry I didn't speak up more when I saw how your family treated you. A classmate I barely spoke to in high school messaged me. You were always the quiet one. Now I see why. Respect for standing up." These acknowledgments, small as they were, softened years of silence. But not everyone supported me. Some relatives called me a traitor. One uncle left a voicemail dripping with disdain. "You don't air family laundry in public. You'll regret this." I saved it alongside Gregory's. Let them pile up. Every attempt to shame me only proved the point they cared more about appearances than truth. As winter deepened, the story grew. The Sentinel ran a small piece about a local case of identity fraud within a family under bank review. They didn't name names, but everyone in Milwaukee who mattered knew who it was. Neighbors connected dots. Friends of friends whispered. At coffee shops, people leaned closer over their lattes, sharing what they'd heard. Gregory's daughter turned him in. Vanessa's facing charges. Denise let it happen. The court of public opinion was in session, and this time I wasn't the one on trial. One evening, I walked around the Capitol Square in Madison snowflakes, dusting my hair, the holiday lights still strung across State Street. I passed a group of people chatting outside a cafe. One of them, a middle-aged woman, said my name. I slowed. "Clara Whitman." "That's her," she whispered. "She's the one who stood up." I kept walking, my heart pounding. For once, being seen didn't feel like exposure. It felt like recognition. Meanwhile, Vanessa posted one last time before going silent. A vague status. "Sometimes envy makes people do crazy things." The comments didn't buy it. "You're projecting, so you admit it." Pathetic. Hours later, her profile vanished, deactivated. Gregory's followed soon after. Denise stopped posting entirely. For people who had built their lives on appearances, disappearance was the only defense they had left. I thought of the dining room on Christmas Eve, the laughter that had gutted me, the silence that had crushed me. Now, the silence was theirs. The community that once applauded their performance was watching the curtain fall, and I had not lifted a finger in anger. I had simply chosen not to be erased. The fallout spread even further. A friend texted me from the Milwaukee courthouse, "Saw your dad's name on the docket for a financial review hearing. Looks serious." Another message from a Chicago colleague: "Vanessa's apartment lease is under dispute. Landlord doesn't want the press sniffing around here either." Even Denise, who once floated on wine and charm, was being dissected. At her women's club, a neighbor overheard someone mutter, "She knew. She had to know." And she said nothing. Her silence, once a tool to keep peace, had become the evidence of her complicity. For the first time, I wasn't the invisible one. They were. The golden child, the booming father, the silent wife, erased not by my hand but by their own choices, illuminated under the scrutiny of the world they once charmed. I sat in my apartment with the binder open, the clearance candle flickering beside it. I thought about how quiet can be both a weapon and a shield. For years, their silence had erased me. Now my silence, refusing to answer calls, refusing to explain myself, was erasing them. They could call me dramatic, bitter, ungrateful. But the community had already drawn its conclusions. The fallout wasn't revenge, it was consequence. And consequence is louder than any shout. The storm around Gregory and Vanessa raged on, but inside my small Madison apartment, something else was taking shape. The silence that once felt like exile was now something I chose, a quiet that belonged to me. I could sit with it and not feel crushed. I could listen to the radiator's hum, the shuffle of boots in the hallway outside, and know that none of it was laced with judgment. For the first time, I wasn't holding my breath waiting for the next blow. I was breathing because I could. It began with a notebook. One cold morning in January, I sat by the window overlooking the snow-covered street, a pen in hand. The notebook was plain, its cover a soft gray. On the first page, I wrote one sentence: "I am not staying angry. I am just not staying." The words felt steady, heavier than the paper they were written on. For years, my family had defined me by what I lacked, what I failed to be, what seat I was forced into. Now I would define myself by leaving that behind. I enrolled in a real estate licensing course at a community center near Lake Mendota. It wasn't a sudden dream, but an idea that had grown quietly while I pored over contracts and mortgage statements. If I could untangle the mess my father had made, if I could track every fraudulent charge Vanessa had racked up, then maybe I could help others navigate similar mazes. I wanted to build something practical, something that gave me independence and maybe even a path to help others. The first class was on a Tuesday evening. I remember walking into the small lecture hall with its beige walls and buzzing fluorescent lights, the air smelling faintly of old textbooks and coffee. About 20 students sat scattered in the room. Young parents, mid-career professionals, even a retired couple starting a second act. I took a seat in the middle, my binder tucked in my bag like a secret talisman. When the instructor asked us why we were there, people gave the usual answers: career change, extra income, curiosity. When it was my turn, I said simply, because I want to know how to protect what's mine. Heads turned, and for the first time, I didn't feel embarrassed. The classes became a rhythm. I studied zoning laws and contract language late into the night. I highlighted passages about buyer rights and mortgage obligations, each section a reminder of the lies Gregory had fed me. I wasn't just learning for myself, I was rewriting the narrative they had handed me. Knowledge became my resistance, every page a brick in the foundation of my independence. But it wasn't just real estate. The idea of a nonprofit had started whispering to me since I printed my first folder of evidence. Women, especially young women, often don't realize how easily families can weaponize finances against them. I had lived it: the forced rent payments, the stolen credit, the erased accounts. What if there was a place where women could learn their rights before it was too late? What if someone had handed me a binder years ago filled with knowledge instead of shame? I started sketching plans in that same notebook. I wrote down a name that came to me like a gift, unwritten her, because so many of us had been written out of our own stories. The vision was still small workshops on budgeting, legal clinics, maybe a support group, but even the act of writing it down felt like planting a seed. I wasn't just escaping anymore. I was building. One morning, I bundled up and walked along the frozen edge of Lake Mendota. The air was sharp, the snow crunching under my boots. I carried with me the last letter Vanessa had sent, a weak attempt at an apology mixed with excuses. I read it once more, standing near the pier where the ice cracked softly against the wood. The words rang hollow. I didn't mean to hurt you. Families fight. You're too sensitive. I felt no anger, only clarity. I struck a match, held the edge of the paper until flames curled it black, and dropped it into the snow, where it hissed into nothing. My breath fogged the air as I whispered, "I'm not staying angry. I'm just not staying." The act wasn't revenge. It was release. Back at the apartment, I began transforming the space. Books on law and real estate filled the shelves. A corkboard above my desk held sticky notes with plans for Unwritten, Her Find, Legal Partners, Look for Grants, Reach Out to Community Centers. The clearance candle still sat on the table, but now it was placed deliberately, a reminder of where I had come from and how far I had moved beyond it. It no longer mocked me, it marked the starting line of my independence. Letters and messages continued to arrive. Old friends reached out, some in whispers, some boldly. A girl I'd once worked with at the bookstore wrote, "I wish I'd known what you were going through. Your strength gives me hope." An older woman from church, one who had always smiled at me in passing but never spoken much, mailed me a card I left my family once too. "Thank you for reminding me I wasn't wrong." Their words stitched something back into me that had been missing for years, connection that wasn't conditional recognition, that wasn't laced with cruelty. Meanwhile, Gregory, Vanessa, and Denise retreated further into silence. Gregory's booming voice had gone quiet. Vanessa's online persona had vanished. Denise stopped appearing at her club meetings. The family that once thrived on appearances was unraveling in public, while I, the daughter they had cropped out, was piecing myself together in private. I wasn't naive. I knew there would be legal battles ahead. Banks and lawyers don't care about poetic justice. But I had evidence, I had a binder, and I had allies like Aunt Deborah waiting in the wings. More than that, I had myself. For the first time, that felt like enough. One crisp February morning, I stood in front of my apartment mirror. No makeup hair tied back a stack of notes in my hand for my licensing exam. I looked at my reflection, really looked. Not as the invisible girl in the bathroom chair. not as the cropped out face in the family photo, but as a woman who had walked away and was still standing. My eyes were clear, my jaw steady. I whispered, "Who am I?" I am someone who writes her own story. The answer wasn't complete. It didn't have to be. It was enough to start. By evening, as I sat back down with my notebook and binder, the hum of the radiator and the muffled city sounds outside, I realized something simple but profound. I had traded one kind of noise for another. The noise of humiliation, of control of silence, used against me gone. In its place, the quiet of focus, the rustle of paper, the scratching of pen, the slow construction of a future that belonged to me. Independence wasn't glamorous. It didn't come with applause or headlines. It came with coffee stains on my notes, late nights memorizing statutes, and the steady building of something no one could take from me again. It came with knowing I no longer needed Gregory's approval, Vanessa's validation, or Denise's permission to exist. It came with the choice to light my own candle in my own space on my own terms. The weeks that followed moved with a strange rhythm. The chaos around Gregory and Vanessa continued to ripple through Milwaukee, but my life in Madison settled into something steadier, quieter, almost tender. For years, I had lived with tension coiled in my shoulders, waiting for the next jab or dismissal. Now the silence of my apartment was not punishment, but relief. Recognition began to arrive in small, unexpected ways. One morning, I opened my email and found a message from Mrs. Larson, my high school English teacher. She had always been kind, but distant, too cautious to interfere when Gregory barked at me during parent conferences. Her words now made my chest tighten. I read about what happened. "Clara, I want you to know I always saw how much potential you had. I'm sorry I didn't do more than. I see you now." I read it 3 times, tears stinging but not falling. To be seen finally mattered more than she could know. Another message came from an old classmate, someone I barely spoke to back then. "You were always so quiet. I never realized why. I respect you for standing up the way you did. It makes me rethink my own family." These acknowledgments trickled in like drops of water to parched ground. They didn't erase the years of erasure, but they reminded me I hadn't been entirely invisible. People had noticed even if they hadn't spoken. Walking across campus, I noticed subtle shifts. A girl in one of my real estate classes stopped me after lecture. She had freckles and nervous eyes. "I know about what you did," she whispered. "My cousin is going through something similar. It helps to know someone else survived." She smiled weakly before hurrying away, but the warmth of her words stayed. My pain had become something useful to someone else. That mattered. At night, I often found myself pulling out the binder again, not to review evidence, but to remind myself of the journey. Each tab told a story of betrayal, but together they told a larger story of survival. It no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a record of the line I had drawn. I would keep it not as a weapon, but as history. Proof for myself that I hadn't imagined any of it, proof that I had chosen to step away. Healing wasn't clean. Some nights memories hit me with the force of the past. Vanessa's smirk, Gregory's booming laugh, Denise's lowered eyes. I would feel the humiliation all over again, my throat closing. But then I would look around my apartment, the bookshelves filling with texts. I had chosen the corkboard dotted with plans for unwritten her. The glow of the street lamp outside my own window, and the memories softened. I wasn't there anymore. I wasn't trapped. I had walked out and I had not looked back. The messages of recognition kept coming. An old neighbor sent a short note. "I should have stepped in when I saw how they treated you." I didn't, but I want you to know I regret it. A professor at the university emailed after hearing whispers of my story. "You have resilience most adults never develop. Use it to build something lasting." Each word stitched a little more of my confidence back together, thread by thread. The biggest surprise came one Friday afternoon when I checked my mailbox and found a handwritten card. The handwriting was unfamiliar, slanted, and elegant. Inside it read, "Sometimes the people we call family erase us because they fear what we could become. You are already proving them wrong. Keep going." No signature, no return address. Just encouragement from someone who had seen, who maybe had lived something similar. I held it to my chest, letting the words sink deep. Reflection also meant confronting the wounds I still carried. I remembered every birthday where my name was misspelled on a card, every holiday seat by the bathroom, every photo where my face was cropped out. I let myself feel the hurt fully, no longer trying to excuse it. But then I asked myself, would I trade those scars if it meant losing the clarity I had now? And the answer, though bitter, was no. The scars had become maps guiding me toward independence. One evening, I walked along the shore of Lake Mendota, the ice still thick but the air hinting faintly at spring. I watched students laughing, couples walking hand in hand, children pulling sleds. I wasn't jealous anymore. I was simply present part of the scene instead of the ghost in the corner. I whispered into the wind, I'm here. I'm not invisible. Healing also meant building rituals of self-recognition. Every Sunday morning, instead of attending church where Gregory's voice once dominated, I brewed coffee, lit a candle, and wrote in my notebook. I wrote down victories no matter how small, paid utility bill on time, studied 3 chapters, did not answer Gregory's call. Each line was a declaration. I exist, I matter, I am moving forward. Deborah called me occasionally. Her voice was still firm, still carrying the weight of years of watching from the sidelines. You're stronger than your mother ever got the chance to be, she told me once. The words cut and soothed at the same time. I missed my mother with a fresh ache, but hearing that comparison gave me hope that I was honoring her memory, not just surviving, but growing. Healing was not loud. It was not applause or headlines. It was slow mornings in my apartment, quiet walks along frozen lakes, notebooks filled with new dreams. It was recognizing that I no longer needed Gregory's approval, Vanessa's validation, or Denise's permission. The recognition I sought came from within, from the girl who had once been cropped out and now refused to crop herself out of her own story. By the end of February, I realized something profound. I wasn't just surviving away from them, I was thriving because I had chosen to leave. The reflection in my mirror no longer looked like someone asking, "Who am I without them?" It looked like someone answering, "I am myself." And that is enough. The first morning of March was quiet, the kind of quiet that carried no weight, only possibility. I sat at my small kitchen table with a mug of coffee warming my hands, the blinds half open to the pale light outside. The binder rested on the shelf behind me, closed, for now, no longer something I needed to touch daily. It had done its work. The fallout was still echoing in Milwaukee, but here in Madison, I felt something I hadn't in years: freedom. It was time to put words into the world, not just documents. I opened my laptop and began typing slowly, carefully. Not a legal letter, not a confrontation email, but a post I wanted others to see. I didn't need to name names. The story would resonate without specifics. Family, I wrote, is not who laughs the loudest at the table. Family is who remembers your name when you're not in the room. Sometimes the people you love most can erase you with silence or smirks. And sometimes the most powerful choice you can make is to walk away, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. I learned that love without respect is not love at all. You can forgive and still say, that doesn't belong in my life anymore. You don't owe your silence to people who used your stillness as their stage. I read the words back and let them settle. Then with one deep breath, I clicked post. The reaction came faster than I expected. Within an hour, the post had hundreds of likes. Old teachers commented, colleagues I barely knew messaged me privately. Even neighbors from Milwaukee chimed in. I saw you back then, one wrote. I should have said something sooner. Another, I went through something similar with my brother. Thank you for reminding me I wasn't crazy. The most powerful responses came from strangers. Your words gave me courage to finally leave. You wrote what I've felt for years. By the afternoon, my inbox overflowed. The story had spread further than my circle. A local women's shelter asked if I would be willing to speak at a support group. A nonprofit director wrote, "Your vision for helping women with financial abuse is needed. Let's talk." My small act of release had turned into a ripple of connection. I leaned back in my chair, stunned. For so long, my words had been ignored, dismissed, laughed off. Now they mattered. Now they reached beyond the dining room where I was invisible, beyond the bathroom chair where I sat forgotten, into the lives of people who needed to hear them. The viral post also carried a sting. Some relatives commented with thinly veiled disdain. Air your dirty laundry somewhere else, one wrote. Families aren't perfect, get over it, another said. But their words no longer pierced me. The support far outweighed the criticism, and besides, their disapproval only confirmed I had been right to walk away. In the days that followed, I continued building the life I had envisioned. I attended more real estate classes, feeling a new sense of purpose with every chapter. I met with a counselor at the community center to discuss my idea for Unwritten Her. She nodded, eyes shining. There's a real need for this. You're not alone in what you went through. Others will come if you create the space. Her belief lit a spark that made my notebook fill faster than ever. At night, I often walked down to Lake Mendota. The ice was starting to melt the air a little less harsh. I stood on the shore thinking of my mother. I carried her note in my coat pocket, the one she had written long ago, urging me to remember my worth. Sometimes I read it aloud to the lake, sometimes I just held it close. It reminded me that even in the years I felt erased, someone had believed in me. She had seen my shine before I saw it myself. Resolution didn't mean everything was perfect. The scars of what Gregory and Vanessa had done would always remain. But they no longer defined me. They were simply part of the story, part of the testimony that might help someone else recognize the signs, sooner leave, sooner heal, sooner. On the evening of my post's third day online, I added one final note. Have you ever had to walk away from family to protect your peace? Share your story. Your voice might be the one someone else needs to hear. The comments flooded in again. Hundreds of them. Stories of fathers who stole sisters who lied, mothers who turned away, stories of survival, of scars of quiet victories. It felt like a chorus, voices rising out of silence, proof that invisibility was not unique to me. And in that chorus, I felt less alone. I closed my laptop and looked around my apartment. It was still modest, still sparse in some corners, but it was mine. The shelves with books I had chosen, the corkboard with plans I had written, the binder with evidence I had compiled, the candle I had turned into a reminder. Every piece of the room was proof of independence, proof of a story rewritten. That night, as I drifted to sleep, I understood something simple and profound. Walking away had not been the end of my story. It had been the beginning. And for the first time, I wasn't waiting for someone else to see me. I was already seen by myself, by strangers who connected, by a community of survivors who understood.